Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
You know, it's interesting. It just seems like, the United States, first of all, with our economic engine going, what are we, $19-20 trillion economy? So there's money flowing everywhere. And then just with the leeways, I guess, or freedoms that you have to do whatever kind of business you want to do, it just seems that without some kind of a moral background or grounding, it's really easy to fall into this trap of thinking that fraud is easy to get away with. I look at, like, right now, the COVID relief funds. What do they say? There's like $60 billion worth of COVID relief funds that was all fraudulent.
Right.
And, you look at that and you say, you know what is wrong with you people? It's like, here we are, and maybe people just think, money just literally grows on trees, but that money had to come from all of us, the taxpayers, and yet they were just looking at it as just a gravy train and saying, you know what?
Yeah.
We've got billions of dollars sitting out there that we can apply for. And I thought, what company was it? Steak and Shake, I think it was, that applied, even though they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and as a whole, they don't qualify, but they started applying for funds based on just the restaurant by itself. And, I think once they got caught and they were like, oh crap, man, we're going to pay some heavy fines, and they paid it all back. But, that's just one example of these people look at these massive allocations that Congress puts out there and says, we got to set aside all this money because everybody's locked down in their homes and they can't work. So we got to make sure that businesses keep running and people can pay their bills and feed their family. And then they just look at it and they say, man, that's just so much money. Nobody will miss it.
Yes. Right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's how they rationalize it. And Jared, you're right. I think it boils down to greed, just sheer greed. And personally, I remember some people were saying, look, you're a PI, you have a business, you can actually qualify for, 10 grand, 20, whatever it was. And I thought to myself, you know what? No, I'm okay. I don't need the money. And it sounds, I don't know, it sounds kind of quirky. I just don't feel comfortable. I'm not going to put in for it. Maybe I could have, but I just decided that not to. But I know exactly what you're talking. And I mean, here in California, there were people that were just raking it in, groups, millions of dollars of taxpayer money.
Yeah. Well, and especially the corporations that were still profitable, that were still up and running and doing fine. They retained all their employees, but COVID didn't affect them. There's a lot of corporations that they actually did better because of COVID. They had a specialty item, PPE and thing. Maybe they were dealing in plexiglass or something like that. And so they were able to rapidly switch things and, if they can benefit from it.
There's an opportunity, I guess. Yeah. Yes, there was a lot of fraud committed during that time. And I had friends that were working for the government. They would actually retired people that were going back to the government and working on these COVID fraud cases. And they would tell me about some of these cases. It was sad.
I would imagine that, like a really big red flag is just people setting up LLCs and then just not doing anything with them.
Right.
They're just, it's just like a shell corporation, and you got money flowing in there, but there's no product, there's no service, there's no
activity.
There's no reason for the activity to exist. Are those some of the things that you look for initially?
Well, I didn't work any COVID cases myself. I'm just talking about some of my friends. But but yes, I mean, in work involving, of course, shell companies, you're delving into, you write to the Secretary of State, you get information about the company, you go out there, you kick the tires. I mean, one of my cases, that Middle East case I was telling you about in Egypt, I remember the fella had a shell company out of Los Angeles. So, and this was a kind of a unit where you said, hey, boss, I got to go to LA, go. I have to go to Atlanta, go. So I flew out to LA from DC, and it was basically this company was nothing more than a tiny little office in a remote part of LA. I talked to the landlord, and he said, no, that guy comes maybe once a year. He opens the door, he goes in, he shuffles a few papers, and he's gone. But no, there's nothing going on there. And then he opened the door. I didn't go in, but he opened the door, and I looked in there, and there was nothing but a desk and like a telephone on the desk, and that was it. That was his office. There was nothing in there. There was nothing. So, obviously he was using, that as a shell company.
Well, at least he had a physical address and
He did
a
have
little bit of furniture. I
Yeah.
mean, aren't there a fair number of people that they'll set these things up and then literally
Yeah.
there's no expenses. There's just money coming in and then money going out different locations.
Absolutely. Yes. You're right. Absolutely.
Yeah. They don't even make an effort for it to actually look like a real business.
No, they're on paper, and that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that was your fraud, but so tell me about the interaction with the cartels. How did you end up with that?
Right. So, we were overseas I had started in Costa Rica, and then we had reassigned to El Salvador. And let me put it this way, El Salvador was not Costa Rica at all. And and again, El Salvador was coming out of this civil war. They had just finished with their civil war. So, you still had armed groups in there that hated each other. It was really was a dangerous place. There were a lot of weapons that were out there. And in addition, one of my daughters got pretty sick. And she was, just a young girl. So, we had to hospitalize her. And then my wife said, you know what, just let's try to get back to the States. So AID took me back to Washington. And when I was in Washington, I got a call. Somebody who knew somebody called me and said, hey, look, I heard about you. I'm the special agent in charge of the El Paso, Texas office. This was a former Secret Service guy now with the Department of Justice. And he said, look, I understand you speak Spanish, and you're pretty good with informants and things like that. Why don't you come and visit me in El Paso? We'll pay for you to come down. And I did, and I was sold on the whole thing on the Southwest border. And of course I speak Spanish, so I felt comfortable in that environment to begin with. But, I liked the people in the office, and, the fact that, we would be doing kind of internal affairs work to monitor our own people, to, actually do investigations involving Border Patrol and INS and ATF and even the FBI. So, which was kind of interesting, because I had been an FBI agent, and now I would be investigating FBI agents for whatever, disciplinary type things. So I thought, this might be a pretty cool thing to do. And again, they made the offer, and I said, I'm going to try it. I'm going to see what happens. And so that's how I got on the Southwest border.
Interesting. So give me what is it the case like when you're sitting around Thanksgiving dinner and people are saying, so describe the best case that you ever helped solve involving the cartel.
So, there's a variety of cases that we worked, and one of them was, I can mention, a cartel case. Another one was a civil rights case involving Border Patrol. And another one was a sexual assault case of female inmates, by a Marshal Service detention officer in San Antonio. So it's kind of, going from, one type of case with one agency to another. But with the cartel specifically, I recall we had an inspector, and this is on one of the land bridges. And this inspector, a former military, guy, but with a kind of a checkered record. For whatever reason, he came on board with the INS, and he was kind of this gatekeeper. These were the gatekeepers of our land bridges, of people and vehicles coming across the bridges into America. Raymond, his first name was Raymond. He married a girl from Juarez who was living in El Paso, and she came with cartel connections. Her family was heavily, connected, well connected with cartel, with the Vicente Carrillo Fuentes cartel. So he began to do these little favors, immigration favors for family and fraudulently little stuff. And that just built to bigger stuff. And he kind of went down this slippery slope. And before you know it, and they were giving him gifts and all kinds of things. And then before you know it, he was waving loads of drugs through his lane. I mean, cocaine, marijuana. And this went on for about 3 years. So actually it was an informant from another agency, from the customs agency. And of course, we all knew each other because it's a small world down there on the border. And our unit was pretty small. So I would, when we came to big cases, I would always elect to kind of join like a task force. So we had I would grab an FBI guy, customs guy, IRS person, of course, for the financials. And so all of a sudden we had this big case on this guy. And his life, in the meantime, was spinning out of control. He was, he had a girlfriend in a strip club. The cartel had given him a motorcycle. He was buying all these cars. They bought a new house. And, it was just his life became out of control, crazy. And, we had a great prosecutor. And so we were on this guy for about, and the source was amazing. He was a part of the cartel, and he was double dealing. I mean, he was, working with us, but we didn't know he was working with other, with other cartels and, trying to make money on the side. And anyway, that's another story with that guy. Long story short, we finally had to take him down. And he ended up going to jail for about 35 years. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was sad, but, a lot of the times people are weak. They'll take cartel money. And in fact, the cartels actually screwed them, because we found out later that the cartels would, they say, hey, look, we're coming through. This car is loaded. You got to let this car with this license plate, and we'll have a little thing on the hanging off the mirror there. And you'll know that's our car. That car, you don't touch it, let it go. That's the drug car. And what he was doing is he was then waving 2 or 3 cars, just because just to make sure, 2 or 3 cars behind him, he waved those through as well. So, just, a lot of those cars were filled with dope to the gills, but he never got paid for those cars, just the first car.
Wow.
So, but he made, I would say he made about almost $1 million in about 3 years.
So any idea of how, any estimates? I mean, I know you can't really know, but any estimates of how many pounds of cocaine and other drugs made through the border based on this guy's activities?
Right. Well, I know for sure that he had about 400. I remember this figure. It was like 460,000 pounds of marijuana. And then the cocaine, I don't recall exactly how much cocaine he had let pass through, but it was enough to get him, about 35 years. They arrested the wife as well, but there was some kind of a plea deal, and she was able to, because they had a child. So they, she got off. She did not go to jail. But I think two of the other Smurfs that were working with them were arrested as well.
Wow. Well, from a strictly business perspective, I mean, you think about the cartel, the investment that they made into this guy, and what was it? $1 million over the 3-year period, but they probably made 100 million based on all the drugs that went through.
Yeah, so, I would think so. They had, Jared, they had about 3 or 4 cells within the Vicente Carrillo Fuentes group actually working this guy. I mean, he was the golden goose.
Hmm.
for that time period. I mean, there were others, of course, there were other inspectors as well, but this was one of the biggest ones.
Wow. Well, like I said, that's a pretty small investment for that kind of return. And in the end, they burned this guy. He's an American. They don't care.
No.
He's like, this guy goes to jail for me. It's kind of like the gangs nowadays. They know that if they have a juvenile do the crime, then the juvenile will get just a slap on the wrist compared to what an adult would. And so they're recruiting 12 and 13-year-olds and 16-year-olds to do all their dirty work, including even up to murder, because even if these guys go out and put some bullets in somebody, if they get caught, it's pretty minimal. And when they turn 18, that goes off of their record, and then they're kind of clean, I guess, if you could call it that. And then who knows, what? But by then, geez, they have to be just neck deep into the whole criminal enterprise of it. And but then they've put their time in as the foot soldier, and now they can become the lieutenant. So yeah, we look at some of these criminals and we're just saying, you guys are just complete idiots. But in reality, there's a lot of thought put behind this stuff, and they adjust so quickly based on whoever, if a new DA comes and the DA's like, well, I'm not gonna prosecute any crimes that are under $1,000.
Right.
Well, look what's happening everywhere. All of a sudden saying, well, as an enterprise, we can send 20 guys in. Everybody has a little less than $900 worth of stuff.
Exactly.
But out of that 20 people, they're walking, they're running out of a store with their arms full of tens of thousands of dollars worth of stuff that they can sell on the street for, it may be 10 cents on the dollar, but look at the money that they can bring in. And lo and behold, it's, you see these videos. In fact, I think I saw a new one yesterday where these guys are, it has to be an organized gang. I mean, these guys are all operating in concert, and they just flooded that. I think it was a Nike store. And you see these guys, they have trash bags, and they just fill them up with shoe boxes and, racks of clothing. And then they just run out the front door. Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.